You're listening to the Veterinary Innovation Podcast.
You're listening to the Veterinary Innovation Podcast. My name is Shawn Wilkie, and along with my awesome co-host, we interview the innovators in this space every week. And I'm really excited about today's topic. Ivan, why don't you go ahead and introduce today's guest?
Hi, my name is Ivan Zach, and I'm happy to introduce our guest, I was elected to introduce because Shawn cannot pronounce her last name. So we're talking to Dr. Mary Holowaychuk. I hope I did it right, but it's very close to where I'm from in Ukraine. I don't know if that's the background. And the topic for today is mental health, burnout, and suicide. So just to qualify Mary, she is a veterinary wellness advocate, compassion fatigue training from University of Tennessee School of Veterinary Social Work. She's a mental health first aid training with the Mental Health Commission of Canada, applied suicide intervention skills training from Center of Suicide Prevention, small animal emergency and critical care specialist with several organizations, assistant editor of Journal of Veterinary Emergency and Critical Care. She finished residency in a small animal emergency and critical care from North Carolina State University, did internship in small animal medicine and surgery from Washington State University. She did her DVM degree in the University of Saskatchewan, and she does web-based work with a 4 to 8 week programs with strategies on mitigating burnout. They are, by the way, RACE approved, so we can ask her more about it during the show. On the personal side of things, she is a certified yoga and meditation instructor and voluntarily taught yoga at the University of Calgary and the other retreats workshops for veterinary caregivers. Both her parents are veterinarians. She loves movies, hockey, and reality TV. Oh my God, what a resume. So I'm super excited to connect with you. We've talked in the past a little bit on LinkedIn. We wanted to connect. Secret about what I'm up to right now. I'm actually finishing my MBA in the school anyway, it's a little school in England. But as a topic, I'm researching lean methodologies and human healthcare. And as my research item, I want to actually conduct a study on burnout and suicide and get some statistics across the veterinary medicine. So I'm super excited to talk to you about it from that side, but also because this is such a hot topic in the industry. And if you could give us, Mary, a little bit of background, how did you turn from your sort of core veterinary profession into focus more on this topic?
Well, thank you so much for that introduction. And yes, indeed, my background is Ukrainian. So my dad is Ukrainian and Polish. My mom is Dutch. So that's where the last name comes from. And that's amazing that you're doing that work. It's just so important. And I'm very passionate about it as well. And it's a good question of why did I transition from daytime veterinary criticalist in academic medicine to what I'm doing now. And it's a really long story. I think it was really just something that evolved naturally over the course of my life, of my career. Having grown up with two veterinarians as parents, I had a lot of exposure to the veterinary industry at a young age. And, I saw really firsthand how difficult it can be sometimes. My mom was a small animal practice owner where we grew up and, for a short time was by herself and then took on more associates. But for, many, many years, she was on call. We would get calls in the evening from clients and she would have to go in. I remember going in and helping her with C-sections and GDV surgeries and all sorts of things, in the evenings and on the weekends. And, it's certainly being a business owner and a veterinary practitioner, it can take its toll. And, it was no different for me going into my career, and especially in the field of emergency and critical care. It's a very intense field. It's highly demanding. The shifts are irregular. You can't predict what's going to happen. The stakes are very high because, the cost is so much for emergency and intensive care. And so it's a lot of pressure. You're often meeting clients for the first time. You don't necessarily have established rapport or trust with them. And, it was just years of a culmination of not looking after myself, not practicing self-care, because let's be honest, most of us were not taught self-care in veterinary school, and just really pushing myself, working very hard, just a very workaholic nature, which was really my coping strategy for struggling with certain things in my life. And so it became a very dangerous, vicious cycle, which really, between the on-call, all of the pressures of being in academia, having graduate students doing research, having clinical duties, it really just took its toll. And so I felt a real discomfort in the sustainability of the work that I was doing. And I felt like, gosh, I don't know if I'm just not cut out for this. This just doesn't feel right to me. I was having a lot of mental and physical health problems. And I thought, I'm only 5 years in. I can't keep going like this. I'm not going to make it. And so I felt called to move back across Canada to get closer to my family. And I didn't have really a clear plan of what I was going to do. I thought I would just locum and speak at conferences and continue to do a lot of what I was already doing, but in a self-employed way. And, it was really the move and the awareness that I was still struggling with the same things, even though I had made this huge change in my life, that really led me to having to make some big differences. So I fell into a pretty deep depression when I left my job and had to, was working on my own and building up my business and was really struggling. And it was kind of, as for many people, you hit your rock bottom and then you recognize, okay, well, something's going to change because this isn't going away. And so that's when I, did my yoga and meditation teacher training. That's when I did a mindfulness-based stress reduction program. I started reading lots of books on, mental health and self-care and boundaries and perfectionism and workaholism. I, saw a therapist regularly for many years. I delved really into this field and I learned so much that benefited me and really transformed my life. And it was just like, one day, it was actually during my yoga teacher training that a bell went off and I was like, this has helped me so much. And I'm not the only one struggling in this profession. So how about I share this with other people? And I'd already been speaking in emergency and critical care. So it was just a natural transition for me to shift my topics into the field of well-being. And everybody wasn't receptive to it at the beginning. They were like, what? You want to talk about, we don't talk about warm and fuzzy. We want to hear about cats in shock. Go back to talking about that. But the conversation is opening up as you're aware. And so I've become an advocate really for wellness in the profession. And I just love it. I can't say enough. And it's still a work in progress for me. I don't sit up on this pedestal like I've got it all figured out. I continue to have my own struggles and I share those pretty openly. But yeah, that's kind of what brought me to where I am today.
That's totally awesome. Thanks for sharing that with us. I can't help but be reminded of our episode that we did with Tara, another great episode of our podcast, similar story. There was kind of this point where it was like rock bottom and it's like something's going to have to change. One of the things that I wanted to dive into or dig a little bit deeper is that aha moment where you're like, I guess it happened at your yoga teacher training. What was the trigger there that was like, okay, this is now going to be where I'm diving into and what I'm going to dig into deeper? And then the other question that I can't help but ask is what was the first book or what was the first kind of opening of this new chapter that really blew it wide open for you and kind of made you go at it with such passion and commitment?
Yeah, those are great questions. It's interesting because it was really two triggers of change that happened in pretty close proximity, within a year of each other. So I had been really in the same patterns as I was when I was in academic medicine. I was rushing around. I had just come back from a conference. I had a 24-hour turnaround before I had to go speak somewhere else. And I was in a bad car accident. And in hindsight, I'm certain it's because I wasn't being mindful. I wasn't paying attention. It wasn't my fault. I got somebody turned left into me illegally. But it's one of those things where you're like, if I had just been present and going slower, that may not have happened. So that accident really rattled me. It was kind of like the universe was like, okay, if you're not going to figure this out, we're going to give you a big sign that is going to purposefully slow you down. And so that really shook me. And it was actually after the accident, with some of the money that I received in reparation for my injuries and so on, I used that to take my yoga teacher training as a gift to myself to deepen the practice that I'd already been doing for several years now. And that's when things really started to transform. So I was reading all sorts of books, anything by Brené Brown really was just transformative for me. The Untethered Soul. It's a spiritual book, but just an incredible, incredible read about differentiating the voice inside our head from the actual, person that we are. And yeah, just, a myriad. I've got most of them on my shelf back here so I could refer to them for reference. But that's when the seeker in me really started learning around that. And then, like I said, things just started to evolve in my yoga teacher training, where I just felt so called to share this information with other people. And that's where I started offering retreats. I thought, now that I'm a yoga teacher, I can bring people to this beautiful mountain location here in Alberta, and we can talk about these issues and we can share. And, things have evolved even more since then, but that's kind of how that all went down.
Everything that you talked about is really close to me. So my veterinary career is not critical care, I shouldn't say it, emergency vet, the one that is unrespected, the one below the specialists, the night guy. and that on its own was a part of this sort of, I can't do this anymore. And the one thing that would be very interesting to maybe share with the listeners is, how do you understand that this is the time to look for someone like you for help? Because I think that the problem in the industry, I think there's multiple reasons. There's, in veterinary medicine, and, every time I remember I got to the point where I was in, I was boarding the plane, burned out, just like, conference talk, this, and then I'm boarding the plane and someone goes, "Oh, you're a veterinarian. That's wonderful." And I just laid it out. And I still remember the moment I was like, oh my God, I was just a terrible person, because I went, you don't know how it is. I see these people that hate me. They want to be at home watching TV. Now their dog is puking. They have to go to the hospital. They see me. They hate me. They tell me all the time that I do it only for money, even though I'm paid not on commission. And then after I save their dog's life, after they fed it something, that they shouldn't, then they leave and never want to see me again. This is how I feel on a daily basis. So I was very, very, deep in a dark space in emergency. And I don't know if I can go back, but what is that moment that we can recommend veterinarians before reaching, to what some veterinarians reach to say, hey, I see these symptoms. I see these clinical signs. This is what I'm feeling. I should talk to Mary. I should ask for help. I should not be shy saying, hey, this dark cloud is coming. So what are those symptoms, if you can help us?
Yeah, that's it. Those are a great question. And I can relate to when you open up a conversation and you share that you're a veterinarian and all of the stuff that can come back at you. I have a funny story about a retreat that I was on not too long ago that I can share later on. But, that you hit the nail on the head. The awareness piece is the number one thing that where a person would start. And this is where I feel very passionately that the conversation really needs to start within the training program. We need to inform veterinary students and technician students and nurses, et cetera, about what to watch for before it's too late. Because I know for me, looking back when I was in academia and I was struggling and having all sorts of thoughts that were like really not normal for me, and reactions to situations, just as you've shared, that really are in misalignment with why you went into this career. And I literally chalked it up to, oh my goodness, like I just don't belong in veterinary medicine. Like somehow I went down the wrong path and I need to get out. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot of people leaving the profession, is because they're misjudging their symptoms as misalignment with the work that they're doing. And for some people, yes, that may be true, but for many people, it's undiagnosed burnout or compassion fatigue. And so the burnout and the compassion fatigue are the two biggest things that I believe, struggle with in this profession. And they are different. We often use the terms interchangeably. The symptoms can overlap, but the underlying cause and the way in which you manage them are different. So with compassion fatigue really often stems from these repeated repeated episodes of moral stress. So especially for you working in emergency, you know, you're dealing with clients who, many of whom have not prepared for emergencies. They don't have the money. They're not emotionally prepared. They'll even, you know, put their circumstance on you and say, well, you need to fix this because you're the veterinarian, despite them not being the ones who've prepared and who have money or insurance to cover the cost of emergency care. And so we're in a position where as a caregiver, it's so embedded in us to want to help the patient, but we can't. And so we either end up doing substandard care because it's all that they can afford, and that's uncomfortable for us, knowing the potential ramifications, or in severe circumstances, we end up euthanizing an animal that we know that we could have helped. So these repeated episodes of moral stress build up this like sticky residue on an individual that just takes their ability and energy to care for their patients and for their clients. It just takes it away. It sucks it out of them. And if you are not recognizing those episodes, tending to your needs, having separation from work, fueling joys outside of practice, speaking to a counselor if you're really struggling, because some of these experiences are traumatic and we need treatment that's similar to PTSD treatment, then you're going to reach a point where not only do you feel awful when you're at work, but you feel awful outside of work. You panic about work. You don't want to go into work. You dread going into work. For me, those are clear symptoms that help is needed. And usually if a person is impacted that severely outside of work in terms of anxiety, depression, and other symptoms, then it's a mental health professional that they really need to lean on, and probably some time away from work will be important. The flip side is the burnout side of things, which an emergency we're also very prone to because we have irregular shifts, we have long shifts, we have very busy shifts, a lot of demands. We're often short-staffed, especially if you're working overnights. You've got the same caseload during the day, but fewer people to help you with it. So a lot of pressures there. And if you're not taking time off, taking vacation, practicing self-care, setting boundaries, all of the things, I talk about in my programs, then you are going to reach a state of one of three symptoms: emotional exhaustion, cynicism, or where you just totally depersonalize yourself from the clients and the pets, or a low sense of personal accomplishment. Like, why am I even doing this anymore? Like, it doesn't even matter. Those are the three main symptoms of burnout. And most people, when they are not working, they don't feel those symptoms. Like when they're at home or when they're on vacation or whatever, they feel great, but then they go into work and they're like, oh, not again. So that's the big differentiating thing between burnout and compassion fatigue. Is compassion fatigue is very much experienced in and outside of the workplace, versus burnout, you take vacation or you've got a few days off of your shifts and you feel normal. Either way, though, if it's really affecting your joy in the work that you're doing, or if it's affecting you on a physical or mental health level, then that is the time to reach out for help. But my preference, and I have some people who come into my programs who are not in the throes of burnout, but they know that it can happen, and they feel, instances where it could be happening. And so they just want to be proactive and have all the information and skills so that they can prevent it from happening.
Wow, that's incredible. I never heard the differentiation between the burnout and compassion fatigue. I thought that they were interchangeable terms. And I kind of flagged Shawn that I wanted to talk about the symptoms. I spent some time with the human physicians that are talking a lot about it. There's a lot of talk about burnout and the cynicism. I found that in my day-to-day practice, that was it. I disconnected from the patients until, I hope nobody listens to me now, but I stopped caring for animals. I mean,
where did you work at? Sorry, Ivan.
But I really said, to me, it was, I really, didn't give a shit. Like, I was like, it's very mechanical. I just fix it. I spend the time. I didn't care about making money. I was making quite a lot of money as an emergency vet, but I was also adding the locum shifts on top of it, 18. I remember I clocked 120 hours in a week. That's 3 full-time jobs. And then it really came down to the point where, I think I am lucky that I'm actually around. It wasn't fun anymore. And my escape was, what I'm doing now. I'm doing more business side of things to help. I think I'm helping veterinarians with their work environment from business perspective, but it is sort of the passion of mine. But that's incredibly valuable information. I want to be very practical to the listeners and to say, okay, these are the symptoms. So some people would hear there's quite a few people that listen to us now, and then they would say, okay, I have this. So where and how they would reach out to you, or if your program is full, what other resources? Is there a helpline where I just call and say, hey, I listened to this program and I think that I have these burnout symptoms? Do they go to their GP? What are the resources available to people that feel overwhelmed, burned out, or the compassion fatigue based on the criteria that you articulated?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And the resources are going to differ depending on the individual circumstances, where they're employed, geographically, where they're located. I certainly urge anyone to start with their employee assistance program if they have it. So a lot of employers now offer assistance that includes counseling or mental health support in some way, shape, or form. And so speaking with somebody, sharing those symptoms, having a mental health professional to really suss out the nuances, is this more along the lines of compassion fatigue and or PTSD sort of thing, or is this burnout, and what are the tools that we could use, to help intervene, and how much is this impacting the individual to answer the question of, do they need to have time off work? And if so, how much time? And so having a trained professional involved from the get-go is going to empower the individual to be able to take that time for themselves. Veterinarians, we're just so much ingrained in our helper mentalities, and we are such people pleasers, and we just can't imagine doing something for ourselves, let alone like taking time off. What's going to happen to the practice? What about my clients? What about the rest of my team? So to have an unbiased professional to say, look, this is serious, your symptoms are severe, you're struggling, this is what you need to do, I think that's a good starting point. I think if an individual, is looking for resources and programs and books and other places to start, I think that that's very reasonable as well. Certainly, even just to kind of get the wheels turning and thinking about some of the issues and what they might be experiencing, my website has a lot of blogs that people can read, and there's information about my programs there that share really who they're meant for and what's involved. So that's at holowaychuk.com. So just my name.com. It's pretty easy. Well, I think even if you spelled it wrong, Google would find it somehow. So, so not to worry about that.
Those
but,
Ukrainians.
I know, tough last names. So yeah, so there's resources there, for somebody who's looking to try different things. There's certainly a lot of veterinary webinars that are offered by different companies in discussing these topics in more detail. Pretty much any conference you go to now is going to have a wellness stream or a wellness focus for some portion of the conference, which is really, really encouraging to see. So don't feel like you have to go to all the dentistry and derm lectures. Like, branch out, go to some of these sessions that might get you thinking a little bit outside of the box, outside of the context of the medical practice, because I really feel in veterinary medicine, this is a huge oversight. In human medicine, they do cover a lot of self-care, mental health awareness, health promoting stuff for the professionals themselves. We really just kind of gloss over it, if cover it at all, in veterinary medicine. So it's up to you, once you're out in practice, to carve out that time for yourself. And even for me, taking a mindfulness-based stress reduction program, it's a 8-week program. They're free in many communities. You just Google mindfulness-based stress reduction, and it's a once-a-week meeting for an hour or two where you talk about mindfulness and the health benefits, and how that impacts relationships and how you interact with your clients and your team. And you learn about meditation and other relaxation strategies like body scans and moving meditations like yoga. I mean, there's just so, I could go on and on. The options are endless, but certainly if you seek it out, you will find it. There's lots of offerings, and I really urge people to step outside of the comfort zone that is the medical learning and continuing education, and to do something for you. Because if you do not invest in yourself and your own mental health and well-being, it doesn't matter how much medical knowledge you have, you're not going to be able to use it. And, Ivan and I, we can both attest to that because we've been there. Lots of medical knowledge and ability intellectually to help, but if you're emotionally and physically not there, then you're not serving anyone.
Yeah, it's so true. It's really interesting just thinking of the group that we have assembled here, the three of us. we've all experienced the burnout, and it's really interesting as a tech entrepreneur, and starting a bunch of companies and buying and selling them. And I remember a really dark place in 2010 where I just couldn't go to work anymore. It was like, I've got a really successful company. We've got 50 staff. We're the best in the world at what we do. And I just can't go to work anymore. So I just said I was leaving and didn't even care, had no plan. And what I wanted to bring up after my own experience is this idea of capacity. We can only do so much. And, looking at all the veterinarians that I know, and I spoke to a friend of mine just last night. He said, I'll call you when I'm leaving the office. I said, sure, no problem. I was tucked in my bed, in my PJs, and I got a call at 10:35 at night as he was leaving the office. And, to line up a meeting the next day. And he said, I've only got an hour that I can make this work next week. I just think of this idea of capacity. One, you're the CEO of an organization. You're the chief bottle washer. You're a medical doctor. You're the director of HR. And you're all of these different things. And we only have so much capacity. And I know myself that, if you take 210 flights in a calendar year and you work everywhere from San Francisco to Vienna, it just doesn't work. You just don't have the capacity. And I think that oftentimes we think we can do all of these things. And I think veterinarians somehow end up in this place that they didn't ever intend to be, especially the ones that are in private practice. And what I've learned through my experience is a little bit of maintenance goes a long way. It's kind of like changing the oil in the car. If you have a meditation practice or, read on the subject before you arrive there, it gives you awareness to where you're going. And I really just heard that resonate with you. So I thought that was really quite awesome.
Mary, I am hoping we'll be able to invite you. I know it's really hard. You're so popular, and we know now why, and from what we read about you. I would love to invite you in the future for more on this subject. I also want to a little bit self-promote. We are planning on, after I will deploy a study through actually significant marketing effort that I'm going to do, having my marketing resources behind me on this study. It's going to be a study that has been done in medical field. There's 16 questions on burnout and awareness. And then I'm going to actually run it through all the roles in the clinic. So managers, nurses, kennel attendants, and the veterinarians. And then I just want to grab the stats and see how bad it is in the industry. And then we have access through this podcast to several veterinary shows. And on one of them, we want to assemble a panel on the topic. And then hopefully having the statistics that I will collect for my study, then build the panel of people that are, they're interested in this, and hope to invite you with advance notice to participate in that and have a meaningful conversation around it. So hopefully we'll do an in advance invitation, and then hopefully the stars will align. So I wanted to use this opportunity to invite you to this. Awesome. And at the same time, there's a couple questions we will ask you. So John,
and no pressure at all, but please say yes, because we're recording this and it would be helpful if you agree.
And it's only a couple of thousand veterinarians that will hear your commitment.
That's awesome. Thanks so much. So yeah, this has been a hard conversation to wrap up. So Ivan, thanks for being mindful. I really appreciate it. I'd go, buddy. So
wow,
first question.
That's the first one. It's
yeah, well, I'm feeling generous today. So, so first question is, if there was one book that you had to recommend, not necessarily on the subject, what would it be? We'll link it in the show notes, and I think people are going to be very interested. So one book, one TED Talk, one piece of media that people should digest or ingest, what would you recommend?
Well, it's an easy one for me. I've been saying for years now that The Gifts of Imperfection by Brené Brown is what I think should be standard reading for all people in this profession. The subtitle is Let Go of Who You Think You're Supposed to Be and Embrace Who You Are. And it just, she touches on everything from boundaries to perfectionism to vulnerability, all sorts of topics that we just do not talk about and don't really think about in this profession. And so I think for all humans, really, you don't have to be a veterinarian to read the book, but that was certainly, it's a very easy, short read. I say easy, it's pretty heavy. I had to take one chapter chapter at a time and let it digest before moving on. But it's not a long book, but very impactful.
She's amazing. Her TED Talks are wonderful.
Yes. If you prefer TED Talks, then any of her work. My favorite stuff from her is definitely her work on perfectionism. So that would be a great place to start.
One last question would be, we love to interview innovators, and I think that this topic and the way that we've chatted about it is super innovative, because it's still, although the stigmatism is starting to fade away, it's still a hard topic that people just don't want to talk about. So I think it is innovative to even be having this discussion, but we're looking for other innovators that you might know. Anybody else that you recommend that we have on the show?
Yeah, somebody who was very influential to me early in my career, especially as I was leaving academia and going out on my own, was Dr. Justine Lee from Vet Girl. I don't know if you've had the chance to speak with her, but she was just, such a great mentor to me in many ways. And she also has a very strong passion for well-being advocacy in the profession. She's shared a lot of her personal journey. She's been personally impacted by suicide in the profession. She speaks very candidly about what you were just talking about, Shawn, which is that you can't do it all. You've got to let some stuff go and delegate. And she certainly imparted that on me early on as well. I don't know how she does everything that she does. I mean, she's still practicing critical care and running Vet Girl and the conference that they have now and everything else. But
I think she has a clone.
she has a clone. Yeah, she's also a mom. She's got a kiddo now. So,
she's a friend of mine. We did interview her. She's fantastic.
She actually taught us how to
would be
podcast.
A good idea to bring her.
We had no idea what we were doing. Totally. She schooled me and Ivan in the ways of podcasting in our very early episodes.
That's the thing. I mean, I don't know how she has so many hats. She's so tech savvy and everything else. So, there's so many people I could, the list I could go on. There's just an incredible number of veterinarians now who are going out and reaching beyond the edges of the envelope, so to speak, to bring really important, innovative things into our industry, just as you are doing with this podcast and other endeavors. And I just think it's so great, because for me, for the longest time, I only saw myself, general practice or doing a residency and then going into academia or private practice. Like, it was just, I had like this tunnel vision. And the fact is that there's so much more that we can do with our lives and with these degrees and with the training that we have, and even outside of that. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of people out there that would have a lot to share.
Thank you so much for listening to the Veterinary Innovation Podcast. If you want to hear about our new episodes, please follow us on any social media channel. Also, you can check out our website at veterinaryinnovationpodcast.com. See you next week.